In a small, forgotten village where the wind carried both gossip and sorrow, a little girl stood each morning with a question too heavy for her age. "If I give you my bread, will you bring my mother back home?" she pleaded with strangers, her voice trembling yet filled with hope. Around her, the people of Uromi shook their heads and laughed at her faith, mocking the innocence they had long buried in themselves. But Amik, small, thin, and determined, returned day after day to the village square. She had nothing to offer but a single piece of bread, hard and stale. Yet she believed it carried the power to call her mother back. That was where she met Okafor. He was an herb vendor, a man who had seen too much of the road and carried silence in his steps. To everyone else, the child's ritual was madness. But when he looked into her eyes, he didn't see a lost girl. He saw faith, raw, stubborn, and pure, the kind he himself had forgotten long ago. Intrigued, he stayed, and in staying, he uncovered truths that the village whispered but never dared to admit. The story told by her grandmother was not the whole story. Amik's mother had not abandoned her in shame. She had been cast out by her own father, forced to walk away with nothing but the promise written in a letter. "I will return to you, no matter how long it takes." Okafor's heart stirred with questions that refused to rest. To follow the thread meant clashing with a family ruled by pride and a village bound by silence. Yet all of it began with a girl who laid her bread on an old cloth as though she were laying down treasure. The bread itself was nothing special, small, rough, and as hard as river stone, with crumbs that clung stubbornly to its surface. Adults would have tossed it aside, fed it to chickens, or thrown it in the dust without a second thought. But for Amik, that piece was everything. It was her only gift, the last bit of herself she could offer to the world. Each morning, before the sun painted the rooftops, she wrapped it carefully in a faded cloth, the same cloth that covered her doll with no head. She walked barefoot past gardens heavy with branches, past sleeping neighbors, and arrived at the square where the wind always howled a little stronger. She sat on the same wooden bench, spread the cloth with careful hands, placed the bread upon it, and stared at the road like someone waiting for a miracle. She never asked for toys or pretty dresses. She never spoke of games or ribbons. She wanted only one thing, her mother. Her eyes said everything her lips could not. But no one listened, until Okafor. He returned the next day, keeping a quiet promise he had made only to himself. He did not come with speeches or false comfort. He sat on the bench beside her, holding a bottle of fennel tea in his calloused hands. The warm herbal scent mingled with the sharp smell of stale bread, and together they filled the air between them. They spoke little, but silence became their language. Like two souls bound by the same absence, they shared something deeper than words. When Amik whispered, almost too softly to hear, "You came back?" her voice trembled like she was afraid it was only a dream. Okafor's reply was simple, yet it carried weight. "I did. You gave me your bread. That's not something you throw away." The square buzzed with its ordinary life, children chasing each other, women trading whispers by the vegetable stand. But for the two of them, the world fell quiet. In that stillness, something invisible passed between them. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a promise. It was recognition, a silent understanding of wounds too deep to speak aloud. Okafor returned again, and again, sometimes with biscuits, sometimes with steaming tea, and sometimes with nothing more than his presence. He asked few questions. He listened. Amik gave him pieces of memory like fragments of glass, sharp and fragile. My mother had warm hands. She always knew when I was scared. She called me her little piece of heaven, but then she disappeared. Each word was a seed refusing to die, even in dry soil. And Okafor wondered, how could someone so small carry a hope so large? How could an entire world turn its back, yet she still believe? The villagers scoffed. That child's losing her mind, just like her mother. Poor thing. No future for her. But Okafor saw something else. He saw her hand her last piece of cassava to a hungry woman without hesitation. He heard her sing softly to her grandmother at night, even with an empty stomach. He watched her gaze at the moon and whisper, "If my mommy sees this moon, maybe she thinks of me too." Faith lived in her as naturally as breath. While others urged her to forget, Amik lit her hope every day like a candle against the dark. And Okafor, a man worn down by life, began to feel something return to him. A faith that doesn't bargain, doesn't demand, but simply believes and gives. By the third week, he arrived with a gift unlike the others, bread fresh from the oven, soft and warm. When he held it out, Amik touched it with disbelief, her fingers brushing it as if it were a miracle. "You brought this for me?" she asked, her voice caught between awe and fear. He smiled with his eyes and answered, "Today I did, but tomorrow." It's you who will remind me what hope really means. She didn't understand completely, but she smiled anyway, and tucked half the bread safely in her pocket. In that moment, Okafor knew the child wasn't just giving away bread. She was giving the world one last chance to redeem itself. Yet the world remained deaf. It would take more than a little girl's faith to break a village's silence. Still, Amik's love grew like roots of an ancient tree, quiet, deep, and impossible to tear out. Ego, her grandmother, bore the years heavily. Her body was weary, her soul bruised by choices she could not undo. She fed Amik, patched her clothes, spoke sternly, but there was always distance, an invisible wall between gesture and affection. For the truth she carried was sharp. She had never forgiven her daughter. Not for leaving, but for leaving pregnant, unmarried, dishonored, and without asking her parents' blessing. Shame burned hotter than grief in Ego's heart. And in the eyes of the village, shame was a curse. And curses, they believed, had to be cast out before they poisoned the whole house. Your mother left. Best to forget. Those were her words to Amik on the 2nd anniversary of her disappearance. But the girl clutching a wilted flower asked quietly, "If she forgot me, why can't my heart forget her?" The question hung in the air like dust that refused to settle. Ego turned away, her lips pressed tight, tears burning in her eyes. That night, as always, she cried alone. By day, she wore her armor of hardness, repeating the same lines to her granddaughter. "Grow thick skin, girl. Your mother is not coming back." She believed if she said it enough, it might finally become true. But buried truths never die, they only sleep. And one night, as Amik slept on her straw mat with the hard bread tucked under her pillow like a dream she refused to let go, Okafor sat on the porch beside Ego. The African night stretched vast above them, stars scattered like sparks on black cloth. He took a chance. "Are you sure her mother left?" Ego did not answer right away. She lifted her face to the sky as though counting every star before speaking. "Certainty doesn't change what happened. She's not here. That's what matters." But Okafor pressed gently. "Why? Why would a mother leave her child like that?" Ego let out a dry laugh, brittle and sharp, sounding more like pain than humor. "Because the world is harsh, and a woman who doesn't listen pays dearly." That was when he knew. Ego wasn't just hiding her daughter's absence. She was hiding the reason. And behind the reason, there was guilt. Days later, while sweeping the packed earth floor of the old woman's room, Ike stumbled on a trunk. It was small, old, with a smell of mold and forgotten time. The lock was broken. Curious, the girl opened it. Inside, between old cloths and folded scarves, was a yellowed envelope. The handwriting was shaky, but still alive. "Mother, take care of my daughter. I promise I'll come back when I can. Don't let her forget me. I just need time. Forgive me." The girl didn't understand everything, but she recognized the name at the end. Oni, it was her mother's handwriting. She ran Togo, eyes wide, and asked, "You knew Mama?" She was coming back. The old woman trembled. She was speechless for a few seconds. Then she snatched the envelope from her granddaughter's hands with a kind of roughness, as if trying to claw the past back into hiding. "That's not for children. Go play, go." But the wound was already open. And now, the grandmother's silence screamed louder than any lie. That night, Okafor read the letter. Sitting on the edge of the straw bed under the faint light of an oil lamp, his heart grew heavy. This wasn't just about a young mother who had vanished. It was a daughter cast out, a woman judged, a mother torn from her child by pride, by fear, by shame. Doigo wasn't a villain. She was just a broken woman trying to fix the world the only way she knew how, by denying what hurt too much to accept. But time no longer accepted silence, and the girl, even without fully understanding, had started to piece together a story the world had tried to bury. What Ego didn't know or didn't want to admit was that the faith of a granddaughter could unearth even the most hidden truths. And in that humble house, built of clay and unresolved memories, the flame of truth had finally begun to burn. In the village of Uromi, as in so many others, tongues were sharp and eyes were nearsighted when it came to empathy. When truth goes missing, people make things up. And that's exactly what they did with Oni. She became legend before she ever disappeared. All it took was someone stumbling over the memory of her name for the whispers to return to the villagers' lips, ready to spit judgment with a taste of cheap morality. She ran off with a truck driver. "I'm telling you," her eyes wandered too much. "A woman like that never stays home. Who leaves her child leaves God. She'll get what's coming." They gathered those phrases like ripe corn, spread them around, chewed them over, passed them on. The square was a stage, and Amik unknowingly was the main actress in a story she didn't write. She passed between the benches with her piece of bread, and the eye slowered, not out of shame, but out of judgment, in disguise. It was as if they saw in her the reflection of a badly told story they preferred to keep buried. That girl's going to end up just like her mother, head in the clouds, always dreaming, walking around with that bread like some baby priestess. All that's missing is her talking to spirits. What no one noticed was the silence beginning to take over her eyes before. Amik still tried to smile, still counted the flowers she saw along the way, still shared the little she had with the street kids. But over time her laughter faded. Her steps grew shorter, her gaze deeper. She spoke less, looked more at the ground. Only Okafor noticed. He saw her coming back from the square with slumped shoulders, as if the bread had turned to stone. He heard the whispers behind laundry lines, felt the weight of the stairs in the air, and it cut him like a knife, because Okafor knew all too well the cruelty of judgment. He had once been the target too, in another village many years before. He lost his wife and son during a birth gone wrong. They said it was punishment that his wife had messed with forbidden herbs. He didn't have the strength to argue. He buried them both and hit the road, and from that day on, he never stopped moving. But now, standing before that little girl who only wanted to see her mother again, his past returned as a lump in his throat. He knew villagers could be merciless to those who didn't fit the picture. Women who loved wrong, children who dreamed too big, old men who kept to themselves, all became fodder for gossip, off at the market. The talk was always the same. That man walking with the girl, is he family? Maybe Hugh wants to take advantage. You never know. Someone should get that girl out of the square. Enough is enough. It was as if kindness had turned into suspicion, as if no one believed anymore that a gesture could be genuine. But Okafor didn't back down. He kept walking through the village, selling his teas, his roots, his silent advice, and every afternoon he returned to the square, sat with Amik, broke bread, told stories from faraway places in Bini. They say a mother's spirit watches over her children until they fall asleep. In Oak, I heard that a flower that grows without water is a flower of promise. The girl listened with her eyes, absorbed with her soul, and even without understanding all the words, she felt there was truth in them. She felt that with Okafor she could simply exist without fear. And it was on one of those days while Okafor arranged his bomb bottles on a faded cloth that a woman approached. It was Mama Chinny, owner of the village store, known for her sharp tongue. You're wasting your time with that girl. This story won't end well. Okafor took a deep breath, didn't argue. He simply replied, sometimes the most beautiful story is the one no one had the courage to tell. She laughed, shook her head, and walked away. But that afternoon, for the first time, Mama Chinny handed Amik a banana sweet. Without saying a word, something was beginning to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. But it was changing. Maybe it was Amik's silence. Maybe it was Okafor's persistence. Or maybe people were beginning to sense that something was wrong with the version they had told so many times. A story where only the mother was to blame. Where no one asked what she had been through. Where no one saw that Amik wasn't a reflection of her mother. She was a seed of something that could be different. But like every seed, she needed care. And in that village where judgment came so easily, someone needed finally to learn how to see. Not with their eyes, but with their heart. Or was not curious by nature. Life had taught him that those who ask too many questions often hear things they'd rather not. But there was something about that girl. Something in the fragile strength with which she waited. In the bread offered with faith, in Thessalon's that hurt more than any scream that unsettled him. It was as if his heart, calloused from losses and farewells, had started to beat differently. And so, on a morning, when the wind felt warmer and the sky duller, he decided to do what no one else in that village had ever had the courage to do. Seek the truth. He started at the school. The old school where Oni had once studied was still open, though its walls were more faded and its benches less filled. The headmistress, a thin woman with sharp eyes named Titi, remembered the name right away. Ah, Oni. She was quiet, smart, very pretty, but she had problems at home. Okafor didn't have to ask much. Like many in the village, the woman held stories that had never been fully told. Her father was strict, very one of those men who'd rather lose a daughter than lose his pride. He filed that away in his mind, like gathering crumbs in a forest trail. Next, he sought out Oyi's former employer, a man named Cabena, who owned the pharmacy where she had worked for a short while. Cabena was a gruff man, tour in his speech. But when he heard her name, he fell silent for a few seconds. She was good, a hard worker, but then she turned up pregnant. And after that, her father came here, caused a scene, nearly hit me just for letting her in. He kicked her out, kicked her. He threw her out like a sick dog, told her to disappear and never come back. Said no daughter of his would raise a bastard under his roof. The word bastard echoed in Okafor's mind. The image of a meat came to him like a hot breath. That girl with all that sweetness in her eyes had been denied before she was even born. and only just the scared young woman had been ripped from the life she knew and cast out into the world with no safety net, no support, no shoulder to cry on. Okafor returned to the village with his chest burning. Gibina's words hammered with every heartbeat. Now he understood, only hadn't run away. She hadn't left out of passion or shame. She had been expelled, humiliated, condemned to absence by all. And the worst part, no one in the village, not the neighbors, not the friends, not even her own mother, had tried to find out if she was still alive. It was easier to swallow a lie than to chew the pain of the truth. That night, Okafor sat on Ego's porch. The stars seemed to hide their faces. The moon waned as if it too felt shame. "Did you know?" he asked. "Know what?" The old woman replied, her voice tired, that she didn't run. That it was her father who drove her away. Her father died believing he was right. I didn't know how to go against him. It was the first time Ego's voice revealed a crack. It wasn't anger. It was regret. But pride still kept her from breaking down. Only now Okafor knew too much to remain silent. The girl carries a guilt that isn't hers. She waits for a woman who was torn away from everything. Ego closed her eyes and for a moment seemed to age 10 years more. Her trembling hands rested in her lap. The words were slow to come. "When only left, I thought it was for the best. It was too much shame. But later came the sleepless nights, the longing, the doubt. But I didn't have the courage. I didn't know how to go looking for her." In that silence, Okafor made a decision. He couldn't keep sitting there sipping tea with the girl, waiting for the world to fix itself. The story had to be rewritten. The pain had to be traced to its source. And if no one had gone after Oni, he would, because it was no longer about curiosity. It was about justice. The next morning, he packed his old leather satchel, filled it with herbs, ointments, and the letter Amik had found in the trunk. He left a note on Ego's table. "I went to find what you left behind, and before the sun could heat the road, Okafor set out because the girl who offered bread every day deserved more than silence. She deserved truth. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to stitch together the torn pieces of a family nearly destroyed by pride." Ego's house smelled like time left in storage. The clay walls held memories that had never been spoken aloud, and the small wooden dresser, tucked into the corner of a room, barely touched by the window's light, was like a chest of everything pride never allowed to bloom. It was there that days before Okafor's departure, Amik had found the letter. And with it the thread of truth her grandmother had fought so hard to keep hidden. The afternoon Okafor left for the city. Silence hung heavier in the house. Amik tried to understand why he had to go. He had only said he needed to keep a promise. She didn't understand, but she respected it because, ever since he arrived, she had learned to trust without needing explanations. She knew Okafor wouldn't vanish like her mother had. She knew the bond between them was made of something stronger than words. Without him around, she spent her time sweeping the house, scrubbing dishes harder than usual, and staring down the road where he had disappeared. During one of those cleanings, she decided to organize her grandmother's drawers. It was an act of affection, but also of curiosity. Ego's drawers had always seemed to hide more than just old clothes. At the back of the last one, behind a cloth embroidered with faded thread, was the envelope, yellowed, torn at the edge. The girl recognized the handwriting before even reading the name. It was her mother's. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat so loud it seemed to echo in the stillness of the house. She opened it carefully, like opening time itself. "Mama, take care of my daughter. I know I disappointed you. I know I made mistakes, but she's not to blame. Please forgive me. I will come back as soon as I can. I will come back. I just need time. One day you'll understand me." Amik read it over and over as if trying to memorize each line. It was like her mother's voice had returned, trembling between the words. She pressed the paper to her chest, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in so long. She hadn't been abandoned. Her mother had promised to return. Her mother thought of her, always had. She ran to her grandmother with the letter in hand. Her eyes were full of tears, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. "Why did you hide this from me?" She asked this letter. She was going to come back. She said she'd come back. Ego didn't answer right away. She sat in the wooden chair, her breath heavy. She looked at her granddaughter, looked at the paper, and lowered her eyes. "Because I didn't want to build hope where there was only disappointment." The old woman's voice was weak. For the first time, there was more weariness than hardness. Amik didn't know what to say. She was too young to understand all the layers of adult hurt, but old enough to feel the weight of that choice. Her grandmother had buried hope to protect herself from pain, but in doing so, she had buried the truth too. Doego continued. "She was my daughter. I loved her. But what she did, it shamed me, made me the target of gossip. Her father died angry, and I was left here trying to hold everything together. I thought if I hid the letter, you'd forget her. It thought silence would be easier, but silence is never easier. It only postpones the pain. Emick didn't shout. She didn't cry in front of her grandmother. She simply tucked the letter into her pocket like someone holding onto a charm. It was her proof her mother loved her, had never forgotten her, and maybe, just maybe, she'd still come back. That night she fell asleep holding the letter, and for the first time in a long while she dreamed of her mother without tears. Dreamed of warm hands braiding her hair, a soft voice singing quietly in the dark, of footsteps returning along the road. Meanwhile, Okafor walked the dusty streets of the city with the letter in his satchel, and the promise in his chest. He already knew where to look, knew where to start, and he carried more than the mission of finding a woman. He carried the hope of a child who had never stopped offering bread with both hands. The next morning, Ego woke to find her granddaughter sitting at the doorway, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you think you'll find her?" the old woman asked, her voice a mix of doubt and longing. "If he takes the letter, she know I'm still waiting." It was simple. It was pure. It was a child's faith. And in that moment, without saying it aloud, Ego felt maybe for the first time that she had been wrong. Not for trying to protect her granddaughter, but for underestimating the power of a love that refuses to die. Because some letters aren't meant to be read with just the eyes. Some letters must be read with an open heart, and sometimes it's the smallest hands that carry the greatest truths. And truth once, said Fiva, fits back in the drawer. The road from Uromi to the big city was long, dry, and full of curves that seemed in no hurry to end. Okafor knew part of the way his feet had walked through many of the cliff-neighboring villages. But that particular stretch felt different. Maybe it was the weight he carried in Highchest, or the letter folded in his shirt pocket, damp from being held so tightly. Every step was driven by something greater than him. This wasn't just a search, it was a return. He started at the market. It was there that stories wandered freely, hidden among the stalls, amid the scent of pepper and yam flour. He showed the letter to a few vendors. Described on spoke of the past. Most said they didn't know her. Some just shook their heads, suspicious. One older woman wearing a blue headscarf took a chance. "I think I've seen someone like that at the sewing warehouse. Works quietly, cries every time she sees I killed." That was enough. Okafor followed. They led to the warehouse, an old building with tall windows and rusty bars. Inside, sewing machines clicked like hurried clocks. Women stitched school uniforms with lowered faces, quick fingers, and tired eyes. He showed the letter to a man who seemed to be the supervisor. The man skimmed it, looked to the back of the room, and pointed. "Last one in the row, the one who barely speaks." Okafor walked slowly like someone approaching an altar, and there she was, thin hair tied in a knot. Pale face, sunken eyes. She sewed with precision, but her fingers trembled slightly, like her soul wasn't quite there. When she sensed someone near, she looked up and froze. "Oni," he said softly, almost a whisper. She didn't respond. Her hands stopped, but her eyes didn't blink. It was as if she'd forgotten how to breathe. I came from you, Romy. I brought something from your daughter." The word daughter filled her eyes with tears. She slowly stood up. The women nearby stopped sewing. The machines fell silent. Time itself seemed to pause. He handed her the letter. She read it without saying a word. The tears began to fall one by one, wetting the already yellowed paper. She sat back down, hugged the letter like it was a body, and there in the middle of the warehouse, a woman shattered in silence. She still waits for me. Shesked, her voice choked. "Every day," Okafor replied. "She gave me a piece of hard bread with both hands and asked me to bring you back." Only dropped to her knees. The cement floor hurt less than the weight of guilt. She stayed there, hunched like someone begging for forgiveness without words. "I thought she hated me, thought she forgot me." Okafor knelt beside her. "Hate you. She loves you so much. She gives up her bread just to see you again." The words hung in the air, suspended between the two, and the women around them, many carrying similar stories under their clothes, began to cry in silence. Not just for Oni, but for all the mothers who couldn't come back. For all the daughters who kept on waiting that night. Okafor took her to sleep at the nearest guest house. She didn't speak much. She just stared out the window, whispering her daughter's name. Every time she said Amik, it was as if she were trying to reclaim the lost years, as if she were learning to say aloud the name she had never been able to without drowning in tears. The next morning, she wore the cleanest clothes she had, tied her hair the way she used to, looked at herself in the cracked mirror of the guest house, and didn't see the abandoned woman anymore. She saw a mother who still had something to give, and when Okafor asked if she was ready, she said, "I'm not, but I'm going anyway because my daughters waited long enough." And together they boarded the first transport back to Urt. In the front seat, she held the letter. In the back, Okafor carried a bag with fresh bread. In both their hearts, a small fear and a newly awakened hope. And on the bench in the square, just like every other day, Amik was waiting, still with her hands outstretched, still with the bread on the cloth, still with her eyes fixed on the road. What she didn't know was that this time what was coming down the road wasn't just the wind. It was the answer she had offered. Day after day, with faith, with hunger, with love, and with bread, they arrived before sunrise. The road still slept beneath the thin mist of dawn, and the roosters crowed lazily, as if still hesitant to wake the world. Okafor and Oni walked side by side in silence. She wore a simple skirt, a button-up shirt, and worn-out sandals. Her face looked older than her years, and her eyes, still swollen from crying, held a deep fear. The fear of not being recognized anymore, or worse, the fear of being recognized and rejected. Amik was still sleeping on the mat with her mother's letter folded beneath her head. It was as if the paper, now smoothed by the hands of hope, had become a pillow of faith. Ego rose at the sound of the door opening, thinking it was Okafor alone. But when she saw Oni standing in the doorway, she froze in stunned silence. The old woman's eyes welled up, but her mouth said nothing. Oni lowered her head. This was not a triumphant return. It was a return on scraped knees, worn down by shame, by cold nights, by memories no one wanted to hear anymore. Okafor gave a gentle signal with his eyes. Don't speak yet. He knew the right moment could not be forced. What mattered now was that a child was sleeping with hope in her heart and might wake up not alone, so they waited. When the sun crept through the cracks in the wall, Amik opened her eyes. She stretched slowly, smelling the cornmeal porridge her grandmother was making. She looked toward the corner of the house and saw a figure. Her eyes took a moment to adjust, but when they did, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood still, eyes locked on the woman kneeling on the clay floor. Oni had her hands clasped in her lap. Her head was bowed, her face covered in tears. It was Amik who took the first step, a small one, then another, until she was standing in front of her mother. The two looked at each other, and in that moment, without words, without explanations, without justification, pain recognized pain. The girl touched the woman's face as if to make sure it was real. Then softly she asked, "Did you come because of my bread?" The voice was so pure, so free of malice it hurt more than any accusation, only broke down. She wept like never before. She hugged her daughter as if she might fall apart. She whispered broken words, trying to explain, trying to redeem herself, trying to rewind time. "Forgive me, my child. I wanted to come back sooner. I was so afraid," but Amik only tightened the hug. "I knew you hadn't forgotten me." Behind them, Ego watched with a chest full of knots. The words she had never said to her daughter now choked in her throat. She felt shame running through her veins, guilt pulsing in her wrists. But she also felt something else, a strange, unexpected relief. Her daughter was alive. Her granddaughter was smiling. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to mend part of what silence had broken. Okafor stepped out and walked to the square. He sat on the usual bench. His tired feet rested on the earth. He watched the sky opening in shades of orange. And for the first time in many years, he felt peace. Not the triumphant kind from fairy tale endings, but a true peace. The kind that comes when something crooked finally starts to set itself right. Hours later, Amik appeared with her mother. The girl was holding the old piece of bread, the same one she'd saved for that day. She held it out to Okafor and said, "Today it's yours." And in that simple gesture, a cycle closed. Because not every story needs grand words to be understood. Sometimes all it takes is a piece of bread and the courage to wait for the right time. The reunion had no music, no crowd. It had tears, silence, and a tight embrace. And that's exactly why it hurt more, because it was real. And in real life, true reunions aren't made of perfection. They're made of forgiveness. The village woke slowly that morning. The air still held the dampness of the night, and the first sounds came from roosters and brooms sweeping the dirt sidewalks. No one imagined that just after sunrise, the road would bring back a face many had already buried beneath their judgments, only returned without fanfare. With small steps, shoulders curved by time, walking beside Okafor and the daughter who had never stopped waiting for her. They walked toward Ego's house, passing the square where the empty bench seemed to guard the silence of all those days. No one said anything at first, but as the road dust settled, curtains began to part. First, a head peeking from behind a door. Then whispers between neighbors pretending to do laundry. And finally the first murmurs, "Is it her? Did Shirley come back with the girl after all this time? How does she even have the nerve?" Oni didn't look around. She kept her gaze on the ground like someone who knows that the eyes of others cut deeper than knives. She hadn't come to beg forgiveness from the village. She hadn't come to justify the years she'd been gone. She came for her daughter, and that was enough. The silence from the neighbors was heavy, thick with venom. And they didn't dare speak aloud anymore, because now before them, there was no longer the figure of the woman who ran off with the truck driver. There stood a mother with steady hands and a sorrowful gaze returning to care for the child and to do for the mother who had cast her out. Ego said nothing when her daughter entered the house with the girl. She stood still, eyes brimming as if time had stopped just long enough to offer her one last chance. Oni knelt down, picked up a bucket of water, and began scrubbing the living room floor. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was simply a beginning. Quiet, steady, without spectacle. The village watched. Over the next week, Anna cared for her ailing mother with patience. She washed her feet, prepared her medicine, combed her thinning hair gently. She didn't ask why she had been abandoned. She simply did what needed to be done. At the same time, she brought life back to the neglected yard, planted greens, swept the fallen leaves, cleaned the water tank. Dotna Meek, now with a wider smile and less sadness in her eyes, began walking through the market, hand in hand with her mother. She no longer sat alone on the bench in the square, but she still made a point to pass by it every day, and she always left a small piece of bread on the wooden seat, like someone leaving a memory, like someone giving thanks. The villagers, once so loud, now swallowed their words. Mama Chini, who had gossiped for years, was the first to change her tone. That girl, she's strong, and her mother, you see, didn't turn her back on the sick old woman. The baker offered a loaf of fresh bread for free. The seamstress complimented the girl's braid. The man at the fruit stand tucked 2 oranges into Amik's pocket without charging. But Oni wasn't fooled. She knew that in the village, apologies didn't come in words. She knew remorse came in small gestures, and that the memory of humiliation didn't fade so easily. Even so, she accepted the averted gazes with calm, because now what mattered wasn't what others said. It was that her daughter was in her life. Okafor, meanwhile, returned to his place on the square's bench. But this time, not as a stranger. The children called him Grandpa T, and the adults greeted him with respect. He still sold his remedies, still told stories, but now he smiled with a heart that felt light. One afternoon, with the sky threatening rain, Only stopped in front of the bench. She sat beside Okafor, a basket in her lap. I never thought I'd come back here and sit like this. Not every return comes with celebration, he said. Some come with roots, and roots, you know, grow slowly, she nodded. And for a moment everything was at peace. That the village, which once only pointed fingers, now watched in silence. And though few had the courage to say it aloud, deep down they all knew those who love in silence build more than those who talk too much. In the beginning came the whispers, then the lowered eyes, and finally silence. The same village that had for years fed off twisted tales about Oni now seemed at a loss for words in the face of her real steady presence. The presence of the woman they once called the runaway. But now she was there barefoot on the dusty ground, sweeping the yard, hanging her sick mother's clothes out to dry, walking to and from the market with her daughter's hand in hers. The words once spat so easily from the benches in the square, now returned to the Ville's mouths like thorns. The judgment that once felt so righteous now sounded like tangled noise because Oni didn't shout. She didn't defend herself. She simply came back and stayed. It was hard for them to see a woman who didn't hide, who instead embraced her own pain, gathered the broken pieces, and turned them into routine. She didn't apologize to the village because she knew she owed nothing to those who had never truly cared to listen. What she did was far harder. She kept going. She planted. She cared. She loved. Little by little, the doors that had once closed began to crack open. Mama Toby, who had so often declared, "A woman who disappears doesn't deserve to come back," sent some flour over through the granddaughter. She said it was left over, but everyone knew what the gesture meant. Baba Keen, who once scoffed at the shame of that family, now asked Annie if she could help his wife with a remedy for her back pain. It wasn't a spoken apology, but it was the most they knew how to give, and in the middle of it all, a meek blossomed. No longer sitting alone on the square bench, now walking through the village with her hair braided by her mother, bare feet on the warm earth and a lighter gaze. She no longer asked each day if her mother would come back because now she was here, and that was enough. One Sunday, the small village gathered to clean the community well, a long-standing tradition. Everyone brought buckets, cloths, and some food to share. Oni arrived with a wrap tied at her waist, sweat on her brow, and her daughter by her side. No one said anything, but everyone watched. She picked up a bucket, scrubbed the ground around the well, washed the rim with papaya leaves, and helped carry water for the elders. She wasn't seeking approval. She did it because she had always done it, and because her presence now spoke louder than words. At the end of the day, as the sun began to slip behind the trees, Mama Chinny, The same woman who once said she'd never set foot in the same house as that woman offered only a seat. "Sit, child. You must be tired." That was all. But in that gesture, there was more than words could say. From a distance, Ego watched, eyes filled with tears. She, who had once feared humiliation so deeply, now saw her daughter being respected, not because she had explained herself, but because of how she carried herself. And maybe, just maybe, in that moment, she finally understood what life had been trying to teach her for years. That true love needs no defense. It speaks for itself through constancy, through dignity, through presence. That night the village slept in peace, and the next morning, Amik returned to the square with a piece of bread in her hands. She sat on the bench. Okafor was already waiting with his fennel tea. She placed the bread between them. "Today it's not a wait, it's to give thanks." He smiled with his eyes, and though no one in the village dared say it aloud, deep down they all knew. Those who mocked the faith of the little girl now bowed before the truth she had carried alone. Because the bread she offered was never just food. It was a promise. It was a bond. It was a miracle. And no poison survives the passage of time when the truth is served with both hands, and a heart that never gave up. It was a clear Sunday morning. The breeze carried the scent of damp earth, and the sun spilled through the leaves of the trees as if blessing the small village, a place that for so long had known more judgment than forgiveness. Chickens pecked peacefully. Women hung bright-colored clothes on the line, and children ran barefoot, laughter echoing like freedom. In the middle of it all, Amik walked quietly. 2 loaves of bread wrapped in a cotton cloth. One was fresher, the other firmer, with a golden crust, just the way she liked it. She passed through the square like she always did, but this time there was no rush, no trace of urgency in her gaze. She sat on the same old bench, the one that had once watched her cry in silence, wait without knowing if she waited in vain and offer what little she had in exchange for something the world had long stopped searching for. But now the bench was different, not because it had changed, but because she had changed. And what that bench represented to Okafor arrived shortly after with his steady stride, medicine box on his back, and the serene tiredness of someone who's seen enough of life not to be surprised by much. He sat beside the girl, no questions asked. The silence between them spoke volumes of trust, of a shared story, of a promise kept. She unwrapped the cloth and placed the 2 loaves on the bench. "One's mine, the other is yours." He looked at her, the kind of look that understood more than words ever could. "Today, the bread isn't a plea, it's a sharing," Hammock smiled, a calm smile almost grown. "Now you belong to our home too." The words were simple, but they held everything. Recognition, gratitude, love. It was the confirmation that he was no longer just a traveler. He was rooted part of the story, part of the home, part of the heart. Around the square, some villagers watched from a distance. They didn't come close, but they saw. And what they saw was more powerful than any sermon. A girl who, instead of returning pain with bitterness, chose to repay it with bread. Who, instead of forgetting, chose to embrace. Who, instead of doubting, chose to believe until faith became reality. On the way home, Amch walked between her mother and Oak, a hand in each. Oni no longer walked with her head bowed. She walked with her head high, not out of pride, but because she had come back whole, scarred, yes, with eyes that had seen too much, but whole. And Ego, watching from the porch, said nothing. But she wept because deep down she knew that little girl had carried a hope. No adult had the courage to hold Dot. And that very day something changed for good. By late afternoon, as the sun hid behind the hills, and shadows stretched memories across the ground, the village gathered as it did every Sunday. Some sold fried treats, some sang old hymns, others told stories of the past. But it was Amik who stood out, not by raising her voice, not by stepping into the spotlight. She simply walked by bread in hand, breaking it into small pieces to share with the elders, the children, and even those who once mocked her. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. It wasn't just a gesture of kindness. It was a living lesson. Because in that act of sharing, there was something much greater. A girl telling the world that true love holds no grudges. It waits, it returns, and when it returns, it feeds. From that day on, no one mocked small faith again. No one laughed at stubborn hope. No one looked at Amik as the daughter of the one who ran away. She had become something more. She was now a symbol. The girl who with a piece of bread unraveled years of silence, mended broken hearts, and proved that faith, real faith, doesn't shout, doesn't demand. It simply holds on, and it wins. Time passed, but the story of that little girl continued to be told. Not on the radio, nor in the city newspapers, but on the benches in the village square, in neighborly conversations over laundry, and in the whispers of mothers who now looked at their daughters with a bit more tenderness. Amy, the girl with the bread, was no longer seen as just a stubborn child. She had become a symbol, a living reminder that hope isn't made of grand miracles, but of small, steady, often invisible gestures. They used to say she had her head in the clouds, but no one noticed that it was the world that had its head far from what truly mattered. She didn't. She always knew where to place her heart. The girl who was called stubborn taught what it means to hope without bargaining. Every day, for years, she sat on the same bench with a piece of bread in her hands. Not to be noticed, not to earn pity, but because she believed with a faith that needs no proof that a mother's love doesn't die with distance, nor with the shame of others. Her prayer was not made of words, but of presence. Her devotion lived in the act of waiting, and she waited. When others had forgotten, she remembered. When they said it was pointless, she continued. And when her mother finally returned, she didn't come with promises or long explanations. She came with tearful eyes and a tired soul, ready to begin again. And that was enough for Amek to understand. Her love had not been in vain. The mother who had been cast out returned for love and stayed out of courage. Oni didn't come back with heroic speeches. She came back with wounded feet, a bent back, and a chest full of fear. But she faced what few have the strength to face, the village that condemned her. She didn't return out of pride. She came because a forgotten letter awakened what she had buried in fear. She came back because a daughter was still waiting with a piece of bread and a heart free of resentment. And she stayed. She cared for her mother, her daughter, and their home. She didn't apologize in the public square. She didn't cry on neighbors' doorsteps. She rebuilt everything with her own hands day by day, with work, with silence, with devotion. The man who was just passing through stayed and became part of the family. Okafor was not from the village. He was a wanderer, a seller of roots and stories. His body was tired from the roads and his heart calloused from losses he never spoke of. But something about that girl made him stop, made him remember that not everyone who waits for the impossible is dreaming in vain. He stayed, became a counselor, a companion, solid ground. He was called upon to bless babies, heal wounds, calm arguments with teas and old tales. He became a grandfather without having been a father. He became a home for those already home. And the village learned before judging the one who leaves. You must ask who pushed them away. The words said years ago she ran away. She didn't want the child. She's just like her mother now, stung in the memory of those who said them. Because in the end, it wasn't only who abandoned. It was the village that turned its face, the family that closed the door, the pride that drove love away. And the one who stayed behind was the child, carrying alone the hope of a new beginning. And to this day, they say in Uromi, whoever offers bread with love can bring even the impossible back home. That phrase whispered from elder to elder has become almost a proverb. It's not written in books. It's not painted on walls, but it lives in the memory of the village. In the bench where the bread was offered, in the home where mother and daughter now share a table, and in the hearts of those who learned, even if late, that the true miracle isn't the return, it's the staying. Because some people pray with words, and others pray with gestures, and sometimes heaven responds with a return, with an embrace, with bread broken in silence. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our